Good morning and welcome to the JCC of Metro Detroit's 69th Annual Detroit Jewish Book Fair. My name is Jamie Loeb and I'm the Senior Director of Cultural Arts here at the JCC. It is my pleasure to welcome you this Monday morning to Michigan Haunts, Public Places, Eerie Spaces, which is part of our Mitten Mornings series featuring Michigan authors. The goal of the Detroit Jewish Book Fair is to bring the best new Jewish books and authors from around the world to Metro Detroit. This year, the rooms we're sitting in may be different, but that purpose remains. The book fair runs until December 9th, and we have an exceptional lineup of events planned. To see our full event schedule, learn about ways to support book fair, and see any events you may have missed, you can check that out at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair. You can find all sorts of interesting things there. This year, in order to provide as much programming as possible to the community, we've made all of our events free of charge. So if you enjoy this event and other book fair events, please consider becoming a patron or donating to book fair. You can do either or both, of course, at our website, culturalarts.jccdet.org/book fair. We rely on community support to make this event happen, so thank you in advance for becoming part of the family. We have a really special event for you this morning, and we want you to be part of the fun. You can ask questions and offer comments in the YouTube comments section below, or by texting the number on your screen right up there, 248-973-7286. We have a great talk prepared for you today, but we'll get to as many questions of yours as we can. While you're here at our YouTube channel, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the little reminder bell so you'll never miss one of our exciting events. So today's event, this morning, we're talking about Michigan Haunts, Public Places, Eerie Spaces with the co-authors Gail Offen and John Milan. I'll be the moderator fielding your questions, but they have a really wonderful presentation for you this morning. So Michigan has two beautiful peninsulas that are connected by stories, legends, and mysteries. As John Milan and Gail Offen, writers and good listeners, have gathered many of these tales in their book devoted to the haunted places of Michigan. From purple gang ghosts to one of the most famous psychiatric asylums in America and the legend of Lover's Leap on Mackinac Island, it's the perfect glove compartment companion for exploring the paranormal and the fun of the Mitten State. So please join me in welcoming Gail Offen and John Milan. Good morning to both of you.
Hello, good morning to you on Restaurant Day.
Good morning. So we are so excited to have the both of you here. You've together authored several guidebooks to Michigan, including one on restaurants. And this is your new installment about haunted places. So tell us a little bit about how you got started with this book, why this book, how this book, all of those things.
Well, John and I both love Michigan history, and we love to tell it in different ways. We never want it to be boring, so we tell it in road trips. We wrote a book on Grand River, which is the Route 66 of Michigan. We wrote a book on iconic restaurants of Ann Arbor, mainly because there wasn't any books on restaurants of Ann Arbor. And this one came about because we've done so much research, and there were so many stories about these buildings and places we went to, like these haunted stories and legends. We thought, wouldn't it be fun to put them in a book? But what's different about this book is you've read about ghost stories and places that are haunted, and those are places in private houses. This book is all public places. So like you said, you throw it in the glove compartment. If you're in Bay City, you can go visit this incredible Art Deco theater. It's a sneaky travel book. And I also want to make the disclaimer that you don't have to believe in ghosts to enjoy this at all. We are not ghost hunters. I own no ghost equipment. I own an art. That's pretty much all the equipment I really need. So it's really just fun tales and a fun way to see Michigan.
Yeah, it's part travel guide and part folklore guide, which is right. as important as the map, you know. Yeah. So what are the stories nearby? So you have behind you some interesting. You are virtually in some interesting.
Yes, we're just
literally floating. So tell us about these places you're in.
Well, I'm in the Whitney, which is in one of the most fun and haunted places in our book, downtown, which it's an incredible story of how it was built. It was built in 1894. It cost $400,000 to build, which is $9.5 million today. And it was furnished with $11 million today's worth of furnishings. And it was built by lumber baron David Whitney. And it was the first house with a private elevator in Detroit. And it's haunted by David Whitney's ex-wife. He built, ex-wife, she died. He built the house for her. She wanted the grandest house in Detroit. She got one. She died, unfortunately, before it was built. So the guy married her sister, Flora. And so the ghost of the woman who never got to live in her house is going through that house going, why am I not living here?
Whoa, interesting.
And these are the Tiffany windows behind me. This place has Tiffany windows, and Thomas Edison put in every electrical outlet. How about that?
Wow.
And what's that?
Where are you, John?
I am at the Cadu Cafe on the far east side of Detroit. It's a Belgian mainstay. It's been around since the 20s when it was a speakeasy. You see next to me here, Yvonne and Robert de Vos. They bought the place in the 1950s. They were Belgian immigrants. They brought their parents, their kids over, and they lived nearby, but they pretty much lived out of the office and back, and they maintained this place like it was their dream place to live and own and operate. So when they died, they decided to hang around. So not only are there pictures over the bar, but they pretty much run the place anyway from the other side.
Well, I got to say, the muscles there are pretty amazing. So,
and John has one other great story about their son. This is the classic Jewish mother story.
That's right. Well, Yvonne liked to sit by the side of the door where the feather bowling takes place, and she'd drink her coffee every morning, and she'd run the place. So after she died, her son Ron would call in and talk to the day manager. Well, almost every time he'd call, he'd hear this woman answer with this broken English accent saying, hello. And he'd say it was the most uncanny thing. He said, I knew it was my mother. I could tell by the accent in her voice. And I'd say, Mom? And all of a sudden it would go dead silent. And the day manager would answer.
I love that story. It's like, that's a good son who calls his mother even when she's dead. Okay.
So I do want to let everyone know we have a kind of a special opportunity for people to get a signed copy of this book. Now, most of the book fair, we haven't been able to organize such a thing. But since you already have a sort of process going for this, people can go to this Facebook page that I am putting in the comments right now, facebook.com/MichiganHauntsBook, and order a copy of the book directly from you that is signed. So special offer. And of course, it's also available at our bookstore. Right. So you have a whole series of stories to tell us. Would you like to jump into that now?
Sure, absolutely. We're going to go through a few of these. And folks, if you have any comments, questions, if you have stories of your own, we'd love to interact with the audience. We're not flustered by people shouting out questions, whatever. However you want to contact us in this lifetime, please do.
Or in the next lifetime.
So we're going to go through some of these. We're going to get through as many as we can, and we're going to also talk with Jamie about these, but we're just going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to learn a lot more about Michigan history through some of these stories. So here's the Whitney, as you see, what I was talking about. They even named the ghost bar after Flora, the wife that goes through the house and is haunting. And also, it's notorious for the fact that the elevator goes up and down without anybody being inside on a regular basis. Now, here's a place that might be closer to some of you. This is a fun story about the Condensed Milk King of Northville. Folks, there must have been a lot of money in condensed milk back in the 20s because this was a mansion. Some of you may have known this as a place called Home Sweet Home. I know I attended some showers and parties there. Charles Rogers, the Condensed Milk King of Northville, built this wonderful house with this staircase in the middle of it. And you can see he had this idea that he would have a wedding for his daughter and he'd escort her down the staircase. Well, he only had sons. One of the sons had a daughter, and he decided to plan this grand wedding for his granddaughter. Unfortunately, that girl eloped. And Charles is said to have died of a broken heart, which a cardiologist told me actually is a real condition. I can't remember the name of it. And Charles Rogers is now seen wearing his tux, occasionally walking down that staircase, waiting for the wedding that's never going to happen.
And we're back to the Cadu. We talked a little bit about how Yvonne likes to answer the phone when her son Ron answers it. There's Ron on the far right there, by the way. But Cadu is known for a lot of ghosts. And the bartender and the manager, they all talk to us about ghosts they've encountered there. And the bartender had a great story. He said, one night I was closing up. It was about 2 a.m. And he said, I looked over, and coming out of the ladies' room was this beautiful woman in this beautiful, colorful dress. And he said, I looked at her and I thought, what's she doing here? I said, ma'am, we're closed. He said, the lady just kind of looked at her dumbfounded, and then she burst into a million colors and just evaporated. I mean, it was just uncanny. He knew it was time to go home at that point. The Two-Way Inn is considered the oldest dive bar in Detroit, and according to the owner, Mary Aganowski, probably the oldest dive bar in America, and it's probably the most haunted, and she ought to know. Mary's been there since she was 16 years old when her parents bought the place. You see the big white clapboard building on the right there. That building was built in 1871, and it became the Two-Way Inn in 1876. Well, the first day they were there, they lived upstairs. Her mother was sleeping on the daybed upstairs, and she was awakened, startled from her sleep, by a strange man. This would probably startle anyone. There's a strange man with a beard staring at her, sitting on the bed next to her. So she screamed, and they decided to research the place, and sure enough, they found that picture in the far left there of the guy that she saw on the bed, who happened to be the man who built the place. His name was Colonel Philetus J. Norris, and he was a Civil War spy. And he was one of the first superintendents of Yellowstone National Park. And apparently he and his daughter never wanted to leave. So there's all kinds of strange ghostly happenings at the Two-Way Inn. Probably the funniest has to do with the ladies' room. You see the door in the middle of the screen there. Mary first encountered this phenomenon about 40 years ago. She said, I went to use the ladies' room. The door slammed on me, and it was even pushing against me. So I thought, well, there must be someone in there. She said, so I waited about 5 minutes, and I thought, there's nobody else here. So she said, I walked in, and of course, the room was empty. She said, after that time, it would happen all the time. Ladies would have a little too much to drink. They'd go to the ladies' room, and the door would slam on them. So interesting stuff at the Two-Way Inn. Another really active place is the new Hudson Inn, and that you can see over there on the far left. That place was obviously a stop along the old Grand River route all the way into the territory as far back as 1831. Well, it's still around today, and you can still have a drink or some food there, but you can also encounter a lot of ghosts. And when they were doing some renovations, they removed this support pillar. And if you look on the far right there, you see that when they removed the pillar, they exposed this opening in the ceiling, and it obviously led to a room that no one knew existed. So the Historical Society in New Hudson came in, and they said, you know what this is? This is where they would harbor fugitive slaves during the time of the Underground Railroad. And, you know, lo and behold, they did some excavating through there, and they found all these hats. You see in the bottom left there, they had hats and bottles and shoes. All kinds of people had left debris in there. So it was kind of an interesting
story. We found a lot of places that were along the Underground Railroad. And of course, a lot of them are in Detroit as well. But it was interesting to see that it was as far out as New Hudson. And in that place as well, they feel that the spirit of perhaps slaves that were hidden there in the place. It's also notorious for having great pancakes and great donuts. If you feel like a trip out to the New Hudson Inn, which is near Milford. Now, many people that went up to Traverse City used to go to the Bowers Harbor Inn. It was a bed and breakfast. It was just really a famous place. It's now called Mission Table. It's a really good restaurant up there. And one of the stories people up there seem to know a lot about is the Genevieve Stickney, who you see up there. Genevieve used to make a lot of jams and preserves from the nearby orchards. Perhaps she consumed a little too many of her products. Eventually, she became too heavy to even climb up the stairs, so her husband built her an elevator, which was a really big deal back then. He also hired a nurse to take care of her because she couldn't move around very much. Well, one thing led to another, and when the husband died, he left his entire fortune to the nurse. Bad. And so Genevieve, unfortunately, was so despondent, it is said that she hung herself in that elevator. Now, the elevator is still there, and it has no electricity connected to it yet. People have reported seeing and hearing the elevator working sometimes when they're in the mission table. And another startling thing is on the first floor ladies' room, occasionally people will look in the mirror and they'll see this woman in period costume behind them. Of course, it's Genevieve checking on her patrons there. And another place that people love in Traverse City, I know I've been there and the food's really good, is Stella, which is the former Willow Lake Asylum. And this is a fascinating place. We have in our book a lot of, there's one out in Howell. Former sanitariums still keep these tunnels. And of course, they're very eerie. And if you look to the right, you can see that they actually, in one of the tunnels, this is where the restaurant is. It's such a fabulous place. And of course, people see former patients wandering around sometimes wearing hospital gowns. But this was an interesting place because of their approach to mental illness back then. This is the late 1800s. And instead of being cruel and using restraints, they used a form of incredible kindness and beauty in this asylum. It was an experiment that apparently was very successful, the Willow Lake State Hospital. So you can still go up there and you can even take asylum tours after you have a meal.
There you go. And speaking of asylums, perhaps the most famous in Michigan is a place called Eloise. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. It was made famous also recently by Steve Luxemburg's book called Annie's Ghost. Eloise was the place that, unfortunately, the old song would say they would take you when they were coming to take you away. It started out as the Detroit Poorhouse. In 1831, it was moved out to what is now part of Wayne and Westland, Michigan in 1839. And at that time, that was the wilderness, folks. And it was just a small operation for people who may have had some sort of mental problem or might have been a drug addict or an alcoholic. But in time, it expanded. Over a period of the next 100 years, it was enlarged to encompass 75 buildings over 900 acres with more than 10,000 residents. So it was a massive property. And of course, over time, people would be there and left there to die and be forgotten. And if you were unclaimed when you died, you would be interred across the street in graves marked only by numbers. You see one of them right here. There are more than 7,000 unclaimed dead here. A very sad story because now we don't even know who these people are because Eloise has now become disused and abandoned, and most of it's been demolished, though there are some plans for it. Gail, you want to tell them?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Someone bought this and they want to turn it into a paranormal hotel, and they want to have decor from the 30s. It's fascinating to restore the place. It's worldwide. It's got fame worldwide. So this should be an interesting experiment, the Paranormal Hotel. We didn't mean to make you all sad on a Monday morning. So, but this is interesting. Way. This is an exclusive Michigan Haunts picture that John took there.
That's right. I was taking pictures in 2002 where some of the buildings had been demolished. And of course, the whole area is considered heavily haunted. Well, I didn't see anything there at the time. I was taking pictures of this little hillock there with the fence, and none of the other pictures were particularly interesting, but this one caught my eye. I circled the area there, and I enlarged it, and what I saw was not there when I took the picture, certainly not what I saw when I was there. You see, if you look on the far right at the top, it looks like a lady in a long black dress with a hat on looking at me through the crosshatching of the fence. And it might even be something else materializing behind her. And I removed the color, I desaturated it, and at the bottom, it's like a black and white photograph. It's kind of like the lady standing there going, what happened to everybody? It's a very haunting picture.
And pun intended. And John went back the next day, and there was nothing there.
Right. Nothing.
So given this photographic experience, I want to bring in a question from the audience.
Sure.
Did you believe in ghosts when you started writing this? And did your opinion change as you went? Do you believe in ghosts now, having written this book?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's hard to decide what a ghost is. We certainly don't know. I do know things happen that we can't explain. And that was one of those things. I couldn't explain that. Our introduction of our book is written by Gerald Hunter, who is a ghost hunter, and he has a series of books about haunted Michigan, and he's an active believer and an active hunter. We're kind of skeptics in our own way, but perhaps there's aspects of physics that make things happen that we can't explain. In this case, I was kind of stunned, I must say.
I'm a skeptic still, but I do believe places that have been around a long time have place memories, I call them, of things and people that were there. But I'm still a skeptic.
Yeah. You stick to your gun.
I love stories, so why not?
A place is considered. Go ahead.
Well, there's another question from the audience. Speaking of stories, essentially asking, did you hear about these stories and then go look for the places, or was it sort of the other way around? And how do the people who, like, especially for the businesses, the restaurants, like, how do they feel about all of this haunting stuff? Is it just sort of
that's a great question. Yeah. That's a great question because most of them are happy about it and they embrace, like the Whitney, they have ghost dinners. They call their fourth floor place the Ghost Bar. They're really into exploiting it. But then there's places places like Greenfield Village. I was a tour guide there one summer. They do not want you to talk about the haunted things at all. It's an educational place. And they don't want to scare anybody. They don't want to. So it's really kind of divided. But I would say most people want the business. But as for the previous part of the question, we did a combination of research on the internet, some of these haunted places, and then we would go to them. And then sometimes when we'd be in a city, like, my God, Bay City and Saginaw have a lot of really great locations. Somebody would say, well, have you gone to, and then they'd suggest another place. So it was like being a sleuth hunting down some of these places. But again, as I like to say, this is one book we didn't really have to fact check except for dates.
Right.
So was all of that as much fun as it sounds? Just touring Michigan and hearing stories?
It is so much fun to hear people's stories and keep some of these things alive. And again, it's a fun thing to do whenever you're anywhere in Michigan. You could be in Coldwater and find this incredible opera house that still has ghost stories. So again, what a great way to see Michigan.
Absolutely. And, like Gail said, it's a travel guide. You can learn about those places and their history. And if something does happen, all the better, right? Out in the Irish Hills of Michigan, that's considered a pretty haunted place. Gail's queued us up to the Walker Tavern there. In 1924, they were resurfacing Michigan Avenue, and they uncovered the unmarked graves of 9 Potawatomi Indians. And out of respect to the dead, they reinterred them there next to the Walker Tavern, and they did a very respectful job.
This is a fun place. This has been restored. And I look at this picture and I want to say the TripAdvisor is going to give it a really lousy rating. But they have remodeled it since then. And the fascinating thing about this, look at number 12 on this card. So this is a place you could go to. It was really famous. James Fenimore Cooper stayed there and Daniel Webster. But number 12 is the murder room. And folks, this is what people did for entertainment before the internet. You could go stay at the Walker Inn and Walker Tavern, and apparently someone had been murdered there. Look on the upper thing there in one of the rooms. A guy named Hipsley was playing cards, and all of a sudden the next morning there was a pool of blood next to the bed. His horse was found down the road, and they decided instead of cleaning up, they would turn it into a tourist attraction. So for 25 cents, you could go look at this attraction. You can see a bottle there and some cards, and that's it. So people would go there, pay 25 cents, and they get to see the murder room.
Absolutely. Now, the question about do we believe in ghosts or not is interesting. Here's a couple of photographs by a ghost hunter named Jeff Westover. He set up a camera in the Walker Tavern in a main hallway, and he had it set so that it would trigger the camera when there was movement. And he left it there all night. And he kept picking up this strange phenomena, this like apparition that would go across the hall all through the night. You see it there in the right-hand photograph. So what is it? We don't know, but it's something.
Here's a story I love to talk about because you might have walked past this in downtown Detroit, and you may still. The Illiches own it, and it's boarded up, and it's down near the LCA, the new arena. It's definitely worth checking out because it's got a great story attached to it. This is called the Alhambra. It was a fancy apartment building in the 1920s, and the whole top floor was owned by Harvey Firestone of tire fame. Well, they had a cook there named Rose Barron, and she was demoted to being a scrub woman, not happy, and she baked up a batch of biscuits for the whole apartment building and put arsenic in them. And 40 people were poisoned, 2 people died, and she went on trial. And folks, even though this was 1905, it was called the trial of the century. This is like the early version of the OJ trial. Now, this is the best picture I could find of her. We have to say, she looks a little guilty in this picture. She had a fabulous lawyer, and you know that he got her acquitted by saying that it was faulty plumbing that caused this arsenic poisoning. She was acquitted. And about a month later, her father-in-law died of mysterious circumstances, which when they did an autopsy was, you guessed it, arsenic poisoning. But people that walk by this apartment building, again, we don't know the fate of it, claim that they see people on the top there looking out, they hear cries. But it was just another fascinating part of the story. Oh, someone just asked about the Detroit Library, the Skillman Library. Absolutely. We're going to get to that in a minute. The Skillman Library is the site of the former Detroit jail, which definitely. The Doherty Hotel out in Clare, we love to talk about this because the Purple Gang's involved. This is where the Purple Gang would go when things got too hot in Detroit. The Purple Gang would hightail it out there. This hotel, built in the 1920s, is still around. There was a very famous shooting when Isaac Lebov shot his cousin Jack Livingston in the bar there. And the Purple Gang were also famous. You see they're a little camera shy here. They were famous for brewing liquor there. They had a speakeasy. And recently, and you can find some of this footage on YouTube, they found an escape tunnel. So when the cops would come there, they could easily escape out of the Doherty Hotel as well. And my favorite ghost story about this is Mrs. Doherty, the wife of the man who built the hotel. She used to wear, ladies, remember Jungle Gardenia perfume? They might even still make it. It's a very strong scent. You can still smell gardenia perfume sometimes in the hallway, as if Mrs. Doherty is actually going and checking out her hotel. Now, the Holly Hotel, many of you have probably been out there. That's a great place, especially during the holidays. Hopefully they'll open up again. Built in 1891, and they give great dinners there. This is a weird story. In 1913, a fire burned the place down. 65 years later, to the very day and hour, in 1978, the place burned down again, which is really very eerie. It was called the Allendorf Hotel for a while as a play on the Waldorf. Carrie Nation came there and famously broke up the bar in 1908, and it's notorious for a Native American chief that goes through there and smokes a cigar. And it also has a dog ghost and a little girl ghost. But it's basically fun to check out. Just a wonderful restaurant.
Absolutely. No stories of haunting can go complete without stories in Michigan of lighthouses and ships. Michigan is actually the home of more lighthouses than any other state in the United States. Gail, do you know how many lighthouses are in Michigan?
122?
Well, that's a pretty good guess.
I know by now.
I've done this before, but almost every lighthouse we encountered in Michigan is considered haunted. They all have stories to tell about the hauntings, and some of them are more famous than others. The one you see there on the left, the Old Presque Isle light, was built in 1840, and that one you might have seen on the news before. They do feature it once in a while because, strangely enough, that light still operates. What's strange about that? there's no way that it could be lighting, even though it is seen lit up frequently. They've even captured it on news programs and documentaries. And every time they go to research it, they can't find any reason for it to be lit up. But there it is.
You know, the lighthouses, there's actually a book on haunted Michigan lighthouses. These people live very sad lives in the sense they were always working, they were alone, and they mostly died where they were working. So basically every lighthouse we travel to has a ghost story. And if you look in the one on the upper right, think about this. They used to have to go out on this pier. This is 100 feet long, and they'd have to light the light 4 or 5 times a day. And this one was particularly difficult because James Donahue was a Civil War veteran. He only had one leg. So imagine a man with crutches going out 4 or 5 times a day to light that light. And you see below, this is his lighthouse home, which is also now a museum. But they do see him, they do hear him upstairs banging away with his crutches. And sometimes they hear him on the stairs as well. Right. Someone asks if there are ghosts of children. That seems especially sad and creepy to me. And we did hear some stories. The Holly Hotel is a ghost of a little girl who was run over by a horse, unfortunately, and was laid to rest in the hotel, and they see her from time to time. And in Howell, there's a place called the Main Street Winery, where the people that bought the place were complete skeptics. They're very religious people, yet there's a little boy named Thomas who used to live there, where they would find toys on the stairs, and they would hear a little boy running around. And to this day, the ghost of Thomas, they've gotten used to it, but he is their resident ghost as well. So yeah, there definitely are in the book some stories about little kid ghosts.
Kind of fascinating stuff. Now, of course, there are a lot of ghost ships in Michigan. More than 5,000 ships have been known to sink in the Great Lakes. And a Flying Dutchman is a ship that we know of that we consider a ship that has disappeared and then reappears. And the most famous of the Flying Dutchman ghost ships would be Le Griffon, which was Cadillac's flagship. It was at the time in 1697 the largest sailing ship that ever was introduced to the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, it was lost on its maiden voyage. It went from Detroit to Green Bay and was lost forever.
Which we say started the tradition of Detroit going to Green Bay and losing. The Lions humor there. And then over here to the right, we have the Edson, which was a destroyer during the Vietnam War. This is in Saginaw. As I said, Saginaw and Bay City have a lot of different ghostly things. It's now docked in Bay City.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing about the Edson is that if you tour it, people constantly are saying they hear voices in the next room. They hear voices over the PA system, and this PA system isn't even really working. But the strangest thing and kind of the funniest is a lot of times people will come out of there, they'll go back to their car in the parking lot, and their car has already been running, and their keys are in their pocket.
This is one of the most fun things in our book, the Nain Rouge. This is the oldest legend of Detroit. In the 1700s, Cadillac, who founded Detroit, was walking down the street. He saw a little red dwarf with fierce eyes and sharp teeth, and he hit it with his cane. And the dwarf put a curse on Detroit that every time anything bad happens, like the 1805 fire, the 1967 uprising, a lot of different things, people will say they see this little red dwarf. And this is, people don't know about this. There's this Mardi Gras parade that happens every year. Well, not this year, in the Cass Corridor. This is from 2019. They have a huge parade with music, floats. It's an incredible celebration. 10,000 people came in 2019. John and I took these pictures. It's a lot of fun. And if they have one next year, it's like in April or May. They have a Facebook page. We highly recommend you going.
Absolutely. Now, this is actually a phenomenon that is actually recognized by the U.S. Park Service. You can see the sign over there on the far left. It says Paulding Lights. It's got a picture of Casper there with a lantern.
This is winning money, folks. So listen up, because we could all win a big payday here.
Absolutely. Now, we just got to go up to Watersmeet, Michigan, which is almost to Wisconsin in the UP. But almost on a nightly basis for almost 100 years, people have lined up on the roadway there, and they have watched the Paulding Lights. Gail's queued up the pictures there of the actual Paulding Lights. These lights appear on the roadway. They change colors. They come hovering over your head, and then they disappear. And this is seen almost every night. We've had so many people come to our shows that say, yeah, I've seen them. They had pictures. What is it? Nobody has been able to say, but in the 1960s, Ripley's, believe it or not, offered $100,000 to anyone who could solve the mystery of the Paulding Lights.
People come from all over the world for this. And we always say to our audiences, hey, whoever is out there, let's all just get in a bunch of vans and go up. It's only 12 hours to drive there. We can all split the money. With $100,000, maybe there's not a lot of people out there. It's still a pretty good payday. So that money is still out there if you're willing to get it. And as I said, Bay City has a lot of great haunted locations. They have this incredible Victorian train station that's incredibly scary looking. This is the State Theater. This was built by the same guy who built the Fox Theater downtown and Art Deco theaters across the country, C. Howard Crane. This is a Mayan theme. Look at the top there of the State Theater with the Mayan warrior. Inside, it's gorgeous. It's beautifully restored. And a former manager who happened to be murdered there named Floyd, he was a longtime manager of the theater. He's just seen there so much. Look at this. They actually, look on the right bottom there, they actually gave him his own seat. And so nobody ever sits in the seat. And sometimes people say they look over and Floyd is sitting in that seat. He has his own special place to watch things. Now, go ahead.
I'm going to interject for just a second. Sorry. I realize that driving 12 hours might be a little much for people, but if you have haunted experience that you'd like to share or, just reference, we do want to hear from all of you watching at home about your experiences, places that you've been to that may be haunted, ghost stories that you think our authors may not have heard. So feel free to drop those in the comments as we go.
Yes, we've had some good questions so far. We haven't been stumped yet, but we're always looking for it. Behind me right now, by the way, is the interior of the Holly Hotel. Many of you may have gone to an event at the Botsford Inn along Grand River, which is also in our Grand River book. This was built as a stagecoach stop when it was called the 16-Mile House in 1833. Luckily, Botsford Hospital bought it, and it keeps it as an office building. But actually, Henry Ford purchased it in 1924 because this is where he used to date his wife. And Henry Ford loves square dancing. The top floor actually has a springy floor for square dancing. And it's also has its own share of ghosts. Sometimes people do say they see and hear square dancing music. So there you go. We talk about a diversity of ghosts. We have ghosts that pinch waitresses, bottoms. We have coffee drinking ghosts in the book. And this one are square dancing ghosts, which is, I like to say, a pretty specific kind of ghost. Now, someone asked about the Skillman Library. I certainly hope you're out there because this is something that very few people know about. So I applaud you out there. This is this beautiful building. It's a branch of the DPL, Detroit Public Library on Farmer downtown. It was also the site of the last public execution in Michigan. And you can see it was pretty well attended up there. If you look, and again, it's very small, you see them hanging Stephen G. Simmons, who was executed for murdering his wife. Then this became a jail. So this is a place where people in the library report hearing chains rattling. They hear perhaps prisoners, and they see people wandering around dressed in old period jail costumes. And so, you're supposed to be shushing in a library, but apparently this library is a little noisier than most people would think. But it's an absolutely gorgeous building. This is one of our favorite stories in the book because it's so romantic. Up in Holland, there's this beautiful mansion built by a man named Dwarf, who invented this thing called the comptometer, which was a souped-up adding machine, but apparently made him millions. In fact, we met somebody in Dearborn that actually used one of these in their accounting practices. And he built this mansion for his wife, Agnes. They were very much in love. Again, unfortunately, she died before she could move in. But at night, people will look in the windows of the Dwarf mansion and see the two of them waltzing together around the place. So it's just a really fun story. This is also a place you can stay, and it's also a restaurant as well.
Now, this is actually a phenomenon that I encountered myself. And also, if you're interested in antiques, it's a great place to shop. Out in Jackson is the Antiques Mall. You see that building in the upper left? That was actually a brothel originally in the 19th century, and it was run by a lady named Blanche, who you see at the top of the screen. Apparently, she likes to hang out there still, along with some other ghosts, but Blanche is very active, and people will see her moving things. They'll hear her banging around, and all the people that work there have their own stories about Blanche. A lot of times they'll tell her to quiet down. One day I was there with a friend of mine, and I had heard that it was haunted and that Blanche likes to play games. And we were walking down the stairs into the basement, there was no one down there. And as a joke, I just said, "How you doing today, Blanche?" And then all of a sudden, from all around us, there was no direction to it. We heard this elder lady say, "Fine." And we just looked at each other stunned. We'd heard the same thing at the same time. And we mentioned it to the lady at the front desk who worked there. And she said, "Yeah, that's Blanche. She loves to talk to people and startle them."
Well, even highbrow places like the DIA have their own ghost stories. When we went there, these guards, they don't, again, educational places don't really like to talk about it, but, the guards there were happy to secretly talk to us about it. And one of the most haunted things in the DIA is one of their most famous pieces, this wonderful 19th century African nail figure. The guards told us that at night, sometimes the guards swear they have seen this nail figure running around. Now, I have to say, if I even saw it running around during the day, it would be terrifying. But I thought that was pretty fascinating. And then there's this huge, huge painting called The Court of Death, which is by Rembrandt Peale that you see there. And at night, the guards regularly tell us they hear this enormous crash in that gallery. And they run over, and it's hanging up there as if the crash is if the painting has fallen off, yet the painting is still hanging on the wall. So it's kind of fun to think of even the DIA, having their own share of ghost stories. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was a tour guide at Greenfield Village. We were not allowed to talk about the haunted stuff there. We have a lot of it in our book, but if you take a guide aside, I'm sure they will tell you about some of the stories there. I would be in the Wright brothers' house in the upper left there. I'd go outside for a second and all the doors would lock and there was no one inside. So I'd have to go and get a key and open the place back up again. So perhaps the Wright brothers are there. There was even, as I said, a coffee stealing ghost at the Firestone Farms, or maybe it was just another guy who was drinking my coffee. I don't know. The ghost of Noah Webster is seen there. So there's a lot of fun stories associated with Greenfield Village.
Absolutely. The Clinton Inn was actually abandoned when Henry Ford found it in 1927. It sat on the eastern end of Clinton, Michigan, and it was considered haunted. He thought, well, this would be a great place to move to Greenfield Village, and he did. You see it down there on the bottom. He renamed it the Eagle Tavern, but apparently a lot of ghosts decided to hitchhike when they moved the building because there's at least two people, an elder lady and an elder man, who love to hang out in the front bar room. And people see them. Sometimes they think they're employees dressed in 19th century costume.
Because they do have those dinners there. They have holiday dinners, at least, before COVID. So it's just kind of fun. And Henry Ford is seen very regularly in his homestead. That's his house there. That was the first building that was moved to Greenfield Village. The next one was the Thomas Edison Laboratory, which is famous because he dug up Thomas Edison's front yard and put the dirt in there too. There's a lot of great stories about Greenfield Village. But one of the most fun stories is the Logan County Courthouse, which is Lincoln's old stomping grounds.
That's right. And actually, it's not a ghost story. It's just a great story. They decided in the late 30s it'd be fun to have a tour guide who dressed up like Abraham Lincoln, since he used to argue law there. So they got this old fellow to put on a beard and a stovepipe hat, and he was leading tours daily. And one night he got a little drowsy and he fell asleep in the chair in there. And a security guard came in there and startled Abe Lincoln out of his sleep. That scared the living daylights out of the security guard, and he ran out of there and he quit that night.
And as I like to say, he probably quit drinking too after he saw Abe Lincoln. And just one last Henry Ford thing. This is the Fire Lane Estate, which has beautiful grounds. It's definitely worth touring. And our favorite story about this one, Henry Ford actually died here in 1947. They see haunted servants there inside the building when they give tours. They see a maid carrying towels, a butler carrying a tray with drinks. And in that garage there you see on the lower right, they see a ghostly chauffeur sometimes at night polishing some of Hank's beautiful cars there. So Hank still has people working for him even in death. Right. And we always like to close talking about Houdini, obviously a Jewish figure, very famous. But Houdini came to Detroit. He considered it his second home. He also died there on Halloween in 1926. He did one of his most famous stunts there, the Belle Isle Bridge, the famous stunt you see in the movie with Tony Curtis. He jumped off the Belle Isle Bridge in 1906 and resurfaced in the icy water. You see him there on the right. He was locked in a 75-gallon canister of milk, which is, what a way to go, death by milk. But I love that picture of his head peeking up through there. And if some of you remember, and it's still there, Fife Shoes, the Fife building there, which is, there we have him hanging from there and escaping from a straitjacket in 1922. And look to the left, who sponsored that feat? Why, of course, it's the J.L. Hudson Company, and he would come to Detroit and do that. Now, Houdini's last performance, as I said, was October 31st at the Garrick Theater, which is no longer there in Detroit, although he did appear at the Majestic Theater a lot, which is still there. He had a temperature of 104, but as they say, the show must go on, and he did his last show. He was very feverish. They rushed him to Grace Hospital, which you see on the upper left there, which looks like a haunted house. Unfortunately, he passed away. His last words were, "I'm tired of fighting." And he was taken to this mortuary below, which is still standing. It has not been restored. It's next to Slows to Go on Cass. His body was laid out there, which later became a music school, and people report seeing Houdini there as well. Now, Houdini did not believe in ghosts or spirits. In fact, he spent almost $1 million of his own money debunking them through the last years of his life. But his wife wanted to see if there was a chance he'd come back. So for 10 years, she would come to the Masonic Temple and hold a seance on Halloween every year to see if he'd come back. And if he did come back, they had a signal. He would sing a song called Rosabelle Believe, which they sang together in vaudeville. So for 10 years, she came back, had a seance like you see here. He never came back. And after 10 years, she said, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. And she never came back. But every year, magicians come from all over the world to Detroit, to the Masonic Temple, to see if they can dredge up the ghost of Harry Houdini.
Absolutely.
Well, that was a little from Michigan. We have many more that we didn't talk about, but we'd love if you'd go on our Facebook page or write to us at michiganhauntsbook@gmail.com and share some of your stories with us. And I'm going to stop sharing now and talk to you and any questions or comments you might have.
Well, thank you so much for all those stories. I do want to let everyone know, since we've been talking about Houdini, that our last book fair event on December 9th at 7 o'clock is a new biography about.
Excited to hear that. Yeah.
So it's an amazing book. Everyone should come and ask the biographer if he knows the ghost stories, because I wonder.
Okay. Now, somebody also asked, are there buildings haunted by the Underground Railroad? And that's a great question. Detroit and Michigan have so many buildings associated with the Underground Railroad. John, you are sort of an expert on that.
Well, one of the things we were talking about, the New Hudson Inn, they believe that some of the ghosts there date back to the time of the Underground Railroad. And then there was a house in Canton that's still there that you can find underneath the cellar. In the cellar there, you can find a secret place they would harbor fugitive slaves. And they believe that is haunted as well. So there's definitely things left over from that time. Interesting period. But
we also left out the Purple Gang also used to hang out at the Schwitz. That's in the book. And the Schwitz is still going strong. So it's kind of fun to think about the Purple Gang hanging out in their towels and haunting the Schwitz as well.
Yeah, they're a little less scary when wearing a towel. I wonder, you have all of these stories from all over Michigan, which is really a huge swath of land comprising multiple cultural zones.
Right.
What have you noticed that's consistent across all of these? What have you noticed that varies by region? What are the patterns? Or are there any?
No, I think there are. I mean, a lot of these have to do with old family legends like the Belgian, or in Frankenmuth, there's a lot of old, the German ghosts in Holland and so forth. And then, of course, as we said, the lighthouses, they tend to be everywhere. But everyone has their old stories of the haunted lighthouses. So some are regional and
right. And in the UP, for example, there's stories of miners because that was a very regional thing up there. There's incredible, if you ever go to the UP in Calumet, which is an old tiny town, they built this gorgeous opera house that would rival any opera house in Europe. And they built this for the miners who came from Europe to feel at home. And we have a wonderful story in there about this Polish actress named Madame Modjeska. And to this day, when people appear on the stage of the opera house and they forget their lines, there's a legend. You look out in the audience and Madame Modjeska is there and she's whispering the lines to you in case you forget that. So there's a helpful ghost there. But it's worth it, again, just to go up to Calumet to see this incredible opera house. So that's a great question, Jamie, because they're regionally with the ethnic groups, that tends to influence what kind of ghosts we're hearing about in Michigan.
Right. And, another thing is Michigan being surrounded by the Great Lakes. There's a lot of stories of lost loves out in the lakes. Minnie Quay, probably some of you are familiar with. Minnie Quay was the young girl in the Thumb region whose boyfriend was lost in the lakes. And so she committed suicide. And you can still see the dock where she jumped to her death. And you can see her grave there. They had written songs about her. It was an important part of.
She was a real person, so that makes it interesting. You could see her grave. Whether the legend is true or not, it's near Port Huron, and that's considered a very famous Michigan legend, the legend of Minnie Quay.
Right. And the legend is
so interesting.
The legend is that she's out there, telling people to come
to join me in the water. Someone actually drowned by thinking someone was in the water and going out to try and rescue her. Right. But if anybody else is too shy to say a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. We get a lot of people in our talks that come up with us after. They wait till everyone leaves the room and they go, I had something happen to me. So we're part therapists as well as ghost storytellers.
Absolutely. It probably comes with the territory. You can all check out their Facebook page right here, facebook.com/Michigan Haunts. I believe your email address is listed there as well. If you
have, but I could put it in the chat, I suppose.
Well, actually, I don't recommend that for security reasons. So we'll just have people go to your Facebook page. They can get in contact with you there. So if you do have a ghost story that you'd like to share, that's the place. We do have a recommendation.
What you had for breakfast. We'd like to hear about that too.
Right. Yes. If any of these restaurants have the experience has stayed with you, as it were. I'm hearing from some of the people in the chat that this is a great gift. I would definitely second that. And I have a question on my text here that says, are there ghost conventions in Michigan, and have you attended any?
Oh.
Well, as we said, we're not really ghost hunters, but it's funny. At the Howell Theater, I live out near Howell, and it's a wonderful story. It's an old theater that is haunted by a ghost of a lion because I guess a circus came near there, and the lion died, and they buried it nearby. It's not the MGM lion, but but they have paranormal conventions there every Halloween, and we actually went to one to see what it was like. It was a lot of fun. They do a lot of listening and things like that, and we've met up with other paranormal groups online and in person. But we're not, as we said, we're not experts, but it's fun to meet some of these people. Though some of them are really a little bit out there. It's a subset, but it's really fun because they're very passionate about what they see and hear. And who are we to doubt this? We're skeptics, but we're not. We're not poo-pooers. We're just, we let people do their thing, and we learn a lot of stories from them and places to go. So we're all for it.
Absolutely. It's true that there's a lot of ghost hunting groups in Michigan, all over the world. Yeah. And if you go online and you do a search, they are having meetings and conventions all the time. The guy who wrote our introduction, Gerald Hunter, he does a lot of ghost hunting excursions. And so you can take part in this stuff, but a lot of them are, it's kind of funny. They'll poo-poo the other group and say, oh, they think everything's a ghost. You know, they find a little phenomenon on the picture and they think that's a ghost.
And there's a lot of rivalry among these groups. Someone just asked about animal ghosts. And there are some in the book. One of the most fun ones is the Henderson Castle. This is a wonderful old structure up in Kalamazoo. It's a bed and breakfast. I highly recommend it if you want a weekend getaway. The Henderson Castle. They actually have a dog ghost that crawls into bed with people at night and sleeps with them. So that almost seems worth it to go up there if you're a dog lover. We have some other dog ghosts as well, but that's just another fun ghost story that's up there as well. That's another animal ghost, the Henderson Castle.
I saw
any of the animals.
I saw Jamie looking for a cat. That's not a ghostly cat, right?
Oh no, my dog is actually sitting right there. I have an interspecies family.
There you go.
I was wondering though, so far the ghosts you've mentioned have all been fairly benign. They move things around, they say hello, whatever. Did you find any stories of like maliciousness? Like ghosts trying to harm people?
Great question, John. I don't think we've ever been asked that.
No, and that's interesting. There are a lot of, Gerald Hunter's first encounter with paranormal had to do with a very malicious ghost, and it scared the living daylights out of him. And he talks about that to great degree in his first book, Haunted Michigan. We have not come into any of those. I mean, there's some things that are
mostly ghosts just move stuff around as far as we can tell. They rearrange the furniture. But, people live, like, for example, when John talked about the two-way in, like she's very protective of her ghost. She doesn't want anything to happen. She doesn't want anybody to come in and do any kind of exorcism or anything. She wants that. She thinks that ghost is part of her family. But Jamie, that is a great question. And we're going to research some of that because so far, every ghost we've come across, or every ghost story, people almost seem protective and want to keep those ghosts there.
It's kind of ironic too, is that, as Gail said, they want to protect the ghost from exorcism, and it's a belief mechanism on a belief mechanism. Are there ghosts? And if there are, is my religion going to overpower the ghost? It's kind of hilarious when you think about it.
Yeah, the cosmology gets a bit complicated.
And religion gets in the way. But look, everybody just likes a good story. That's our disclaimer on that. It's not meant to be any kind of religious experience. Even like Montauk Cemetery, people told us stories about that. Of course, it's a cemetery, so it leads to think there would be, but people claim they drive by at night and see all these dark shadows out front. They hear bells tolling, the Machpelah Cemetery on Woodward. So I guess if there's going to be ghost stories, a cemetery seems as good a place as any.
Right.
That's very good point. I wonder if, that is in the big picture a regional difference, because, I've lived a lot of different places, and a lot of the ghost stories I hear, there's certainly there is a huge category of ghosts just sort of being, and that's scaring people because they're there. But there also is a category of ghosts who try and lure people off the road or into the water, or, there's the Phantom Hitchhiker type of stories that, I suppose they're not really malicious, but they're trying to get something from people and interact with people in a different kind of way. And I wonder, if Michigan is just a little more laid back in the hereafter. Our ghosts are just a little more content.
Well,
where are you now?
Exactly.
Oh, I'm back at the Whitney just because I wanted to show off the fact this is the ghost bar up on the 4th floor, where they even have a drink named after Flora. And again, just another spectacular place to have dinner. And hopefully, again, they'll reopen. But it's definitely worth checking. The Whitney is one of those places where you can even walk into and not eat, just walk into and take a little tour of the place. So that's definitely worth checking out.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I think to your point, though, Jamie, people do like to categorize ghosts. As I think Gail mentioned, place memories. It's almost like watching a film of something that happened there. And then there's the poltergeist, like Blanche. So I think that there's so many varieties. We don't really know much about it, but we categorize it anyway. We buttonhole ghosts, right?
I'll tell you one place I wish I could haunt is the Stage Deli. That's a place that I have been missing, living out in the country like I do. So I'm hoping to haunt that place soon.
Well, they're still doing takeout, I think. So,
okay.
How far a drive is that for you? 2 hours?
They don't know about where I live. So, yeah.
Right. For a while, I lived in Kentucky. My husband started making his own pastrami because that was our only option.
Impressive! Wow.
So I feel you. 3 weeks is a long time to wait for a sandwich. It was good pastrami, but still. So highly recommended to all of you to find the Stage Deli, but also actual food rather than ghost food.
Right. We can have to talk about food.
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you to Gail and John for being with us this morning. It was so fun to hear all of these stories. Highly recommended. Pick up their guidebook. It's a great way to travel around Michigan. And I want to say thank you to all of you who are watching with us at home. You can see our full schedule again here at our website, but our next event is going to be at 11 o'clock today, 11 o'clock Eastern, Monday, December 7th. We'll have Paula Scheuer talking about her new book, Kosher Instant Pot Recipes. We hope you can join us and have a great day.